So everybody survived the long day yesterday. Sharon was saying she went home and completely passed out. I was going to do something else last night that never happened. I kind of did that too, as a matter of fact. It wasn't just you guys. So, yeah, it was a lot. So we'll review today, and then we've got our next pieces to do. But we'll begin with a meditation. So if we get in our meditation posture, we'll begin with a few minutes of settling the mind, and then I want to do a meditation kind of based on what we were talking about yesterday. So first, just sit with your back straight, your head tilted slightly forward, your tongue on the roof of your mouth, and your hands can either be in the meditation posture, your right hand on top of your left with your thumbs touching, or resting on your knees is fine. And then just spend a few moments focusing on the breath, the sensations in your body, either at the area of your abdomen, your diaphragm expanding and contracting, or the level of your chest, your lungs filling with air, contracting, or the subtlest point to focus is the area around your nostrils. So either the air going in and out, you can sometimes feel on your upper lip or higher up in your nostrils. So just try and use that as the focal point for a few moments. And when your mind starts to drift off, just gently release the distraction and return to the breath. And now think of a time recently that you had a strong, disturbing emotion, a mental affliction. It could have been anger, or jealousy, or pride, or strong grasping and attachment. Think of a time recently that you felt a strong, disturbing emotion. And think about the incident that provoked it, what was going on, all the details. And did you do or say anything as a result of that strong emotion? Did you engage in any kind of behavior, either verbal or physical? What happened as a result of that strong emotion? imagine in that episode, in that scenario, if you'd had an understanding that it was due to past karma that you were having that experience, perhaps it was the experience similar to the cause, one of the 4 karmic results, that it wasn't just random circumstance, or you weren't just sort of a helpless victim of someone else's behavior, but you'd actually seen, oh yes, of course, this is a result of a past action done at some point in the past, perhaps even a past life. If you've been able to bring that understanding to that episode, imagine how might your feelings have changed. How might the emotion itself perhaps have been different? And as a result of that understanding, how might your behavior have changed? The way you reacted either physically or verbally to that episode. Okay, so let's review a little bit. We covered a lot of territory yesterday, which is why everybody fell asleep at about 7:15. So let's review. The first thing that we were talking about was the characteristics of karma, kind of laws of karma. Sometimes it's called, like how karma functions, sort of how it operates. Who remembers any of those characteristics of karma? Anybody? Yes, Jenny.
Multiple eyes.
Yeah, so what does that mean?
It means that, like we would have rated in points, that it might start out as a 1 one day, and a 2 the next day, and a 4 the next day.
Yeah. So the result that we experience is not necessarily proportional to the cause, is what that means. So it magnifies, it expands, it increases over time. It kind of builds up that head of steam, and I think it was Jane was asking, like, how does that work? What's the mechanism of that? And we were saying, sort of replicates, it's passed from one mind moment to the next, those karmic seeds. I mean, this is a way of understanding it, you know, in terms of a metaphor. It sort of like digs the groove deeper in a way, like every time it replicates, so that your experience that you can have as a result of creating a cause can be really magnified, not necessarily equal to, you know, the magnitude of the cause. What else?
Karma is definitely to be experienced.
Yeah.
No matter what, you're creating a karma, and that seed, you will experience it, whether you experience it in this lifetime, next lifetime, next lifetime, but
Yeah.
you will experience it.
Yeah, that's right. So once you've actually created the cause, you will experience the result. And if you don't create the cause, you won't experience a result, right? So nothing's random. Actually, everything, we say karma mostly ripens in terms of our subjective experience. And we'll look at that more today, just our subjective experience of, is it pleasant, is it unpleasant, is it neutral? Which is why you don't know for someone else, was that a good karma ripening for them or not? Because two people can have completely different subjective responses to the same thing.
you don't know whether it's a blessing or a negative. I don't know. I've been experiencing a lot of things that I could very easily label negative karma ripening. But at the same time, given the framework of my practice or understanding, I'm like, oh, maybe these are just lots and lots of blessings.
Yeah, right,
because
right.
it's really deepening an understanding that I'm having about things. So
Yeah, that's right.
how do you, right?
Yeah, and that's what, when we talk about like thought transformation,
It might even subjectively feel unpleasant, but can we take it as a lesson? But even the same episode, one day can feel pleasant, the next day it feels, for you. And then two people are sharing the same thing. So was it a disaster or was it a blessing? And there's this famous Tibetan story that's great about that some of you may have heard. And it's sort of like there's a family with a horse, and the horse escapes the paddock. And the neighbors say to the father, "Oh, what a drag, like that's terrible." And he goes, "Oh, let's see, So 2 days later, the horse comes back leading 5 mares, wild horses. And they go, "Oh, that's awesome." And he goes, let's see, So the son of the family is trying to break the wild horses, train them. And he gets bucked off and breaks his leg. And the neighbors go, "Oh, disaster." And the dad's, "Oh, let's see." The next day, the army comes through recruiting young men for the army, and the son can't go because he's got, so it's like that, right? We don't know even in the moment. But even in terms of our subjective experience of does it feel pleasant, does it feel unpleasant, there's a lot of difference from one day to the next, from, same episode. So you can't look at the thing that happens and say, that's a ripening of negative karma, or especially for anybody else. I mean, just forget about that. Just forget about trying to second guess or figure out what's going on for anybody else. Let that one go right off the bat. Okay. What are some of the other characteristics of karma? Yes.
Karma is dynamic.
Yeah. So we're always creating new causes, right? It's not like fate. It's not like destiny. Helena.
Doesn't disappear, doesn't go away.
bummer, isn't it?
Doesn't just like fade away. If you're in denial, la 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 la, it doesn't just fade out. So once a karmic cause has been created, implanted in your mind stream, what are the 2 options? Purify or experience it. That's it, right? Just because you're in denial, just because you try to make believe it didn't happen and that Mr. Karma wasn't watching when you did it, it doesn't work that way, right? So it doesn't disappear. And then karma is definite in terms of the type of cause relates to the type of experience, right? So we said non-virtue will only result in suffering. Virtue will only result in a pleasant experience. So if you make that large donation to the nonprofit and immediately stub your toe, John Lennon was wrong. There is no such thing as instant karma. We say that we can experience the result in the same lifetime if the cause was very powerful. Remember those factors that made the karma especially powerful, the nature of the act, your motivation for the act, the object of the act. So you do a really powerful virtue in terms of your spiritual teacher with the purest motivation possible, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then it could be that virtue is so powerful that lag period shortens, but it never disappears, right? It's never the thing of do the nice thing and trip and break your leg 1 second later. It's not like that. Okay? Good. So then we had the 4 components. You guys are so good, I don't even have to go back to the page. You just nailed it. So what about the 4 components of a complete karmic action? So in order for the thing to be complete, it's not just a question of just doing the thing, right? Which is often what we think, oh, I did it. Oh my gosh, disaster. So yeah.
So you have to have the object, the intention and motivation to do the act,
Yeah.
to the actual execution of the act,
That
and the
is-
completion of the act,
Yeah.
and then also the completion that there's a sense of satisfaction.
Right. So that completion had two parts, right? The act succeeded, right? You pulled off what you intended, and you had some sense of satisfaction. Like I said, it doesn't mean you throw a party, you rejoice. It just means, good, meant to do that, did it, great. Say, even if you have any regret during the course of the action, that is weakened, that last one.
Like swatting a mosquito, so it's funny, you swat it and you're like,
Oh,
and you feel like,
yeah,
oh,
right.
I don't want to do that.
No, the thought, the second component had three parts. So the motivation was one, and then? Anybody else remember those three parts of the thought, the second one? Do you remember, Karen?
Maybe in a few minutes.
Okay. So three parts. So we had the intention or the motivation.
Of the thought,
Yeah.
the planning or something of doing it.
Well, that was the intention. Who said recognition?
Yeah, recognition.
Yeah, the recognition of the object, right? So that's why when you step on the ant without even seeing it, there's no recognition, right? And then what was the last one?
Obscuring afflictions.
Obscuring affliction, right? Which is one of the big three, ignorance, attachment, or aversion, needs to be mixed in there. And it might just be the ignorance that we all have all the time about the ultimate nature of reality. You know, it doesn't need to be a strong emotion like anger, necessarily strong attachment. Most, I'm just assuming you guys, like me, still at this point of not being able to actually see the ultimate nature of reality directly. And if you are an Arya Bodhisattva, thanks for pretending to show up on Sunday. Like you could really still be in bed or benefiting things in some other way. Thank you for showing up. But yeah, there's a gap, right, between the way things appear to us and the way they really exist. So at least that is in operation, which is interesting, which is why we say even our good deeds below a certain level of realization are always tainted by ignorance. But still, we gotta do it, because there's no way we're gonna get that spiritual momentum for that realization without even, they call it contaminated good karma, right? Beyond the point where it's not contaminated by ignorance, they don't even actually use the word karma anymore, right? So a being who has had a direct realization of the ultimate nature of reality, they call it the vast accumulation of merit. They don't even use the K word for that person. But for us, even with our virtue contaminated by the ignorance that's just sort of the subtext of every perception we have, but still, we can't wait, And sometimes people, when they start the path, get into this thing of like, oh, I don't know, and is it good, and yada, yada. And then you get kind of paralyzed, but you have to act, right? We don't know necessarily the ultimate result of all of our actions. It is contempt, but you got to do it. Otherwise, you're never going to get enough virtue to get that realization. Okay, good. So that was the four components. And what about the four results of any complete karmic action? So with all of those four components complete, you get four results. Anybody remember those four results? Yeah, Karen.
You are born in the same, in an environment that reflects.
Yeah, so the environmental result. And that was that weird one, right? Like arid, rocky, whatever, smelly. That was not intuitive. Remember, we had those on that karma quiz, and that's a little bit hard. You can't really figure that out. So those come from scripture. What was one of the other results of that? Yeah.
Result of the act that you will keep doing that again in future lives.
Yeah, the behavior similar to the cause, right? So that's, according to Buddhism, is the worst one, because we keep creating that cause over and over again. It's a result of the past karma and a new cause for the next cycle. What else? Yeah.
The action similar to the cause where I stole in a past life, now people are stealing from me.
Yeah, so the experience similar to the cause, right? So that thing that you did, you experienced something similar to that in terms of your own experience, which is mostly what we think of when we think of a karmic result. That's the one of the four that we mostly think that what goes around comes around thing, right? And what was the fourth one? The entire rebirth, right? Remember? And then we got into that throwing karma discussion. Entire rebirth, right? So if you had a very heavy killing karma done with all four components complete, strong motivation, if that was, that would ripen and into an entire realm characterized by extreme suffering, one of these suffering realms of rebirth, right? And then in the next time you're a human, you would be experiencing the other three results of that karma. So all of those results of karma. Good. And then we were talking about then we kind of went into the karma quiz, and then you saw the correlations there between cause and result. And we were talking about designing a purification plan kind of aimed at, your biggies. And I was saying, it's so interesting with people. Like I said, there's usually not many surprises because of the action similar to the cause. A lot of the time, the things that score high that you're having a lot of the result of that experience is no surprise because it's something you're struggling with, right? So for a lot of people, that karma quiz gives them faith in karma because it's like, who would have known, that this weird experience you keep having is a result of that thing? But then it's no surprise because you realize that, you've done that before. And then one thing we started talking about at the very end was techniques, because Karen was saying, so like when I'm doing my purification practice at night, I don't have any idea what I did that day. Like, how do I, kind of focus my purification practice for what I did? And I was mentioning this practice that I have done for years, and Sharon said she's been doing it for 10 years, really powerful. So I kind of drew how I do it. You take a little notebook, you load it first thing in the morning with the ethics that you're working on. And for me, I always divided my page into 8 squares like this. Each square has a plus and a minus sign because you're working on what you're doing to support that ethical behavior, right? It's not just a confession book, it's a rejoicing book too, right? So 6 times a day. And it's good to kind of key these to regular things that you do. Like, before breakfast, mid-morning tea break, before lunch, mid-afternoon coffee break, before dinner, before you go to bed. Like things that you just habitually do so you get in the habit of doing it. Because otherwise you begin, and at the end of the day you've done 1, and it's 7 o'clock at night and you're trying to do 5 more, and you've forgotten. So every couple of hours, so what you can load them with is the 10 non-virtues. For those of you, somebody mentioned the Bodhisattva vows is a good thing to be working on. Some friends of mine load theirs with the 6 perfections, right? That's a nice thing to be working on. How am I doing with my generosity? How am I doing with my patience? And then every couple of hours, you pull out your book and you reflect on that specific one, whatever you've put for that square. Now, it doesn't need to be what you've only just done in the last 2 hours, right? Because you're rotating through. Just think about in the last day or so, how am I doing with, generosity? Oh, yesterday I, offered something to someone, or I passed that homeless person and completely ignored them. And then you write both what you're doing to support it and what you're doing that may not have been so, supportive of that ethical discipline. And then at the end of the day, I always had 2 squares that I just reflect on the whole day. And if there was something that didn't relate to anything that I'd loaded into my 6 squares, at the beginning of the day, I put that there, right? Like some big thing that you did or didn't do or whatever, it didn't necessarily relate to the vows and ethics that you were focusing on that day. You just reflect at the end, then you do your purification practice at the end of the day, and you got your data there, so you can really purify and rejoice. That's always important to do. I always say, you know, nice to do purification practice at the end of the day, and nice to really rejoice at the positive things that you did. So it's not just a confessional, it's a rejoicinal too, you know, at the end of the day, that we're really focusing on the positive things that we do. And then for that, we were kind of talking about this idea of concentric circles. So like for killing, for example, smashing the mosquito, you know, or the spider would be in the middle. That's the bullseye. I took my thumb and bashed it, or I took the book and bashed it. This would be, I saw the spider walking across the floor that a lot of people were walking, and I didn't move it out of the way. You know, and maybe this would be, oh, I saw the spider up in the corner in a web and, you know, didn't move it. So you kind of think broadly, right? Because if you only leave it at the bullseye, this book thing isn't really going to teach you the subtler level. You know, maybe on the outside for a killing karma, this would be, oh, I was driving the car and changing the radio and not watching where I was going. You know, that's something that could potentially threaten a life or threaten someone's safety. It's very peripheral, it's not killing, but this is kind of the level that it's nice to work with in our lives, right? Because if you're just going for the bullseye, your book's going to be blank. But this is kind of training our mind to be subtler and subtler levels of what relates to that, you know, ethic, what relates to that even peripherally that could get me close. Because if you're not getting to this level, you ain't never going to get to the bullseye. That's the point. This protects you from ever going there, right? So these peripheral levels, so the more awareness and mindfulness, you know, when we start our mindfulness practice, you know, we're mindful of this, that's awesome. And then as our practice progresses, we're mindful of like subtler and subtler levels of our ethical behavior. So that's quite cool, you know, to work on that. Yeah, Jane.
Yeah, with that in mind, I work alone, so I can protect my
Yeah.
I can protect people by not interacting with them. Basically. It's a strategy. However, so if that's the case, I watch my mind. I would like to work on the triggers.
Yeah.
Because I see,
Right.
you know, the anger arise, and you know, thank goodness nobody's within 10 feet.
Yeah.
So I don't act on it, which is, you know, circumstantial.
Right.
But you know, I would like to work on the trigger itself.
Yeah.
Just in case someone comes in my radius.
Well, that's right. That's
Yeah.
right. And that,
but even in the car, you know,
yeah.
someone will do something and there's a trigger that goes off of,
Right.
you know, impatience or
That's
whatever.
right. That's right.
So, you know, is there...
Yeah, you can work
I mean,
on
that's
that.
good that I'm not acting on it.
But you can still work on that. I was in long solitary retreat. I did my book every day, even though I didn't see anyone, and I was in silence for 3 years. I had plenty of ammunition.
Right.
Because in my head, I played out the scenarios, and that's what I used. You know, I would... Elena's laughing at me. It's true. You know, you play out the memory or the fantasy or the this or the that.
So how do you get over to that, though?
Well, then that's what...
Stop an action.
Well, I'm saying that's what you write in your book. That's the peripheral level. So you're not saying anything to someone, but you're thinking the thought. That's what you write down in your book so that you get...
You stop thinking.
Well, it just helps that awareness. Believe you me, it's really embarrassing I know this for a fact through my experience, to write the exact same thing in your book every single day. You start to work on it, you know, because it just, even though nobody else is seeing it, you're just like, wow, I keep having the same thought, and then that's kind of food for your meditation. Then you work on it to rehabituate yourself. Like I've mentioned, you know, my problem with my critical judgmental mind that often came out in my speech. So I'm in long solitary retreat. It was almost more painful to just be having the critical judgmental thoughts in my head. Nobody is around to diss, but it was still going on in my head, and it was so painful that that's when I finally realized, wow, I've really, really, really got to shift this thinking. So actually I found in solitude is almost more painful than if you're just acting out, because it's just spinning around like the gerbil wheel thing in your head. So that's what I would write in my book. So that's why I say, like, this is doing or speaking or whatever. This is even just thinking about it. That's even just the thought that could lead to that speech. So that's what you work with. That's what you work with. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it is. But again, karma is dynamic, so we can change those habits, right? So you have that habit to have that thought. And by the way, we're talking about karma, and actually in terms of karma, we talk about the imprint that ripens in terms of an actual experience, but we have imprints of our mental afflictions too, right? That's a different level. It doesn't ripen in those 4 karmic results of a complete action. But that's why when we were talking about this thing about violent video games and this whole level, that's not going to actually give you a whole experience of a full killing karma, but it's just that imprint in our mind, you know, and that's one of the things that I find kind of the more I get into my spiritual practice and the more, I guess, you know, kind of committed I feel, I'm really careful about what I'm going to expose my mind to. My mind is precious real estate. And at my age, my time is seriously running out. How much am I going to expose myself to something that's going to... Somebody gave me a book by an author that I really like, and it was so well written and really fascinating and extremely disturbing. It was this dystopian-like thing, you know, where after the apocalypse, and it was this guy, it was actually, what's her name, a Canadian author that's so great. She wrote, Margaret Atwood. And it was this dystopian trilogy, and somebody was like, oh, you really like Margaret Atwood? It was so disturbing after like a couple, and I was fascinated because it was so well written. And then 2 or 3 chapters in, I go, I really don't need to go there. You know, it was so disturbing to the mind. I was like, nah, it's well written, it's all of this, but I don't like the way it's making, I don't like this imprint in my mind, you know, and you get more and more sensitive to, I have a friend who's a nun, she lives in New Zealand, and you know, I've been with her a lot, and she has this thing, like somebody will say, oh, there's this great movie, you know, I've got the DVD, I'll bring it over and we can watch it. And her question is always, is it uplifting? You know, she's always like, is it uplifting? And then the person's always like, it's really good. And is it uplifting? You know? And it's sort of that. Is it something that's going to actually be inspiring, uplifting? And I think about that with what I expose myself to. So again, that's a subtler level than the actual action or the word or whatever. But like I say, the more we get into and really devoted to our spiritual practice, our mind is precious. You know, and there's only so much time we have in this precious human rebirth that if we realize how incredibly rare, I mean, if we had any idea how much energy went into creating the lifetime of everybody in this room, it would blow your mind. You know, we say for a precious human rebirth, some holy being in a past life kept pure ethics, practiced the 6 perfections, especially generosity, and made pure prayers. May I be Karen at Kurukulla Center in 2015. You know, that's the energy that went into creating your life. Are you just going to waste it on video games? Like, why do that? You know, so really thinking like that is serious business. It's serious business, and it's just up to us to protect our minds. Okay? Do you have a question? You okay? Yes. I thought so.
Yesterday, you mentioned how the road in front of the monastery was, was broken after you guys, did your thing.
Yeah, after we did that thing.
You said that your good actions, karma forced that guy to go do that.
Yeah.
So let's say, hypothetically speaking, right? Let's say I pass a homeless person early in the morning, asking for change, and I'm like, no, I don't have any change. And then on my way to the ATM, I go get money out, again, ask for change. I don't have any change. And then, you're on the bus and somebody else asks for change. And then suddenly, you just give it.
Yeah.
It's just
absolutely.
Not even thinking, you just give it. Is that karma forcing you to do it? And therefore, it's not you who did the virtuous action. Karma made you do it.
I mean, I was kind of being funny when I said our karma forced, but in a way it is true. And that's why there is a difference that you will engage with one person and not another. The scenario you're saying, that happens all the time with all kinds of things. And it is, it's not like you are just a robot and their karma is literally forcing you. It's still your act of generosity, but there is something about that connection karmically with the one person rather than the other, that, like you say, you just give. You don't even think about it. It's just happening. It's because there's sort of, karma is complicated because the karma of the object is part of it, right? So that's why I was saying our karmic connections that we have with different people determines all kinds of things about what's going on for us, what's going on for them. And in an exchange like that, it's both beings' karma, entering into it. So that but it's not like, oh, you won't get any virtue from because that person's karma is so powerful it literally forced you. I was just kind of exaggerating to make a point. But yeah, that person's virtue was enough that then they got a donation from you, whereas the other person didn't have the merit to actually get anything. Yeah, it works like that. So it's dynamic that way too. Like I say, I'm presenting it as kind of the simplified points, but when it comes into an actual situation and everything that's going on and all the interrelations of dynamics and how many factors, it gets really interesting and very complicated. But that's why when we make a connection with someone, that's why, and when we dedicated last night, I just kind of threw it in there without explaining, but sometimes the question comes up, okay, Shakyamuni Buddha, the historical Buddha, became fully enlightened. There's other enlightened beings. How come I have to become enlightened too? Can I just go for liberation from samsara, which quite frankly is a lot easier? Like, how come I need to become a Buddha? And the answer always is, because you have a specific karmic connections with specific people to lead them to enlightenment. They say that's why in the time of Lord Buddha, there's all these stories that frankly are so frustrating, like Shariputra heard one 4-line verse and got some high state of realization. I'm like, I've been meditating for years. What the hell? But they say because of so many lifetimes, and Lord Buddha would say the story about the past lives, and then whenever he would tell the story, he'd be like, and then Shariputra was the monkey, and Ananda was the bird, and, Devadatta was the king, or whatever. Because of those karmic connections, then in that lifetime, when the Buddha was the Buddha, right, because of the karma, then that person heard 4 lines, and that was it. Exactly. So that's why for all of us, right? We're taking the responsibility because we've got karmic connections with certain people. I find that even at the level that I'm at, which is like 0, I can be with a room full of people. I can just say the Four Noble Truths is the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause. Somebody's like, oh my God, that's so profound. Somebody else is like, you know, just because of like the connection, I'm just saying it, like you know, and just because of the karmic connection, even at everybody's level, really. So that's part of it. So, I mean, for me, that really gives me a feeling of real responsibility. It's like, yeah, like I was saying, that thing of, you know, when I was in that long retreat, I thought of the people that I felt. I had one friend, and I always really suspect that he's a Buddha, because when I was going into long retreat, when I was just a Dharma Center director, I wasn't a teacher at all, I'm just an administrator, he'd come to me and he'd go, give me the oral transmission of the Vajrasattva mantra. And I'd say, go to Rabina for that. Go to John Landau, like go to a teacher, and he'd be like, no, I need you to give it to me. You know, and then 15 years later, I'm going into long retreat, and he was like, look, you better do good, because I'm depending on your butt to get me to enlightenment, so don't mess up. You know, and then in retreat, I'd be like, oh, wow, he's a Buddha. Because, like, who would be depending on me for anything? But that's it. It's that sense of responsibility, you know? So that's how those karmic connections work. So you're right. It's the recipient's karma, too. You know, it's the recipient's karma. And that's how sometimes our behavior can be really different, isn't it? Isn't our behavior really different with different people? And sometimes it doesn't make sense why at all, does it?
And I can tell you, this has been my direct experience of, as a mother, loving them dearly. My reactions to the two of them, very different. One of them, I can't, no anger arises.
Wow. No.
I mean, he can be a real, you know, real difficult. And I think, okay, yeah, that's just ego. Benjamin. He is leading me. He is leading me. I swear he is my little guru, and he's leading me. So I'm like, you're the one who's leading me because I have to work at being patient. I watch my mind around him a lot closer.
That's right.
So interesting. It's because here are two little people who came out of me, and they're, you know, I mean, all this stuff.
And they're twins. They got the same genetics, but it's a
Totally
different, totally different mind stream with
Different karma. And that's the thing, when I was growing up, there was this big debate about nature versus nurture. Remember this thing? And the behaviorists were really big. And they were leaving out the biggest part of the equation is karma. There's nature and there's nurture, and bigger than either one is karma, isn't it? Because here's two beings with the same exact genetics, same exact environment, totally different, totally different. Yeah, really interesting. Okay. So let's, Chantal.
Question on the karmic seed of the memory and the impulses of the way Jeanne shared about the distinction and the discernment of, there is the karma that is truly the teacher beyond the ego for oneself. The distinction of the thread that connects you as a web better than a computer to all those connections. Where do you do the delineation of this electrical wire of a belief system that you carry? There's a big, large space of what is, there's the nuance between the real karma that you need to embrace no matter what. And then the belief system. Couldn't you say a thought is just a thought, not now, please? So you speak to yourself because you have to listen to that energy and say, okay, that thought, not now, please, not now. A thought is just a thought, but it seems that the groove of the karma is so deep in the brain, mind, by the nature of our physicality, the body just being a physicality, like a car,
yeah.
and learning your own system in your brain, right?
Well, we're going to look at that next. When is it, because this sort of relates to this idea of when do I have a choice and when is my kind of joking language, when is my karma actually forcing me? When is it so much that I can't just say, okay, I'm just going to let that thought go? And we're going to look at that next because we're going to look at the 12 links. That's why I wanted to do this while we were fresh and not last night, because there's a lot to this that I think will help to explain all of that inner relationship and how it works.
That you present in the actuality of your practice as a Buddhist nun, I don't know exactly that's the correct way. What intrigues me about the nature of the higher mind, of the higher ascension, of what you call it uplifting, by the nature of our movement every day in our body, would it be possible that this thread that everyone is looking at the Buddha, but what intrigues me and strikes me deeply as a core, not that I'm a Buddhist, I have very careful of labels. So the nature of the thread of this, what you call enlightened beings, the Buddha, of the purity state, the state of purity, like this gentleman, the third one on the bus, he gives some money. We know in our heart that this moment, he was living in the moment. He was not in the past, he was not in the future, but there was that exquisite recognition of the thread of that pure energy, that pure mind, and the lifting up, and how to move that thread of connection without falling in the trap of a mindless journeying within. So then when you listen carefully to your higher self, to yourself, to really listen to that connection, not to lose, I believe that when we lose that thread, that's when we fall apart. But if the karma is that thread of grace, isn't it? As putrefying as it looks, or as horrible as it looks, as we know from war.
Well, let's move on to the 12 links, and I think that'll kind of clarify a little bit. And it's just kind of the journey. I think our imprints become stronger and stronger as we, it's a process. Actually, it's a real process. We get kind of hooked in, maybe some attraction to some being that we feel like has qualities that we want to emulate, and then more and more and more we can see that more and more clearly, and we have more and more attraction. It's all very much a process in our spiritual journey. So let's look at the 12 links, because I think that'll Jane.
One unfinished note here from yesterday. The 4 pure practices, could you just...
So it's those are the ones that have to do with non-retaliation, right? So not scolding back if someone scolds you, not criticizing and humiliating if someone criticizes and humiliates you, not hitting someone if they hit you, even if someone kills you, not trying to kill them. So that's what's known as the 4 pure practices. It comes up in the Bodhisattva vows. It also comes up in monastic trainings. It comes up in several places. Yeah. Thank you. Yes. All right. So in your booklet, kind of in the middle-ish, page 11? Diagram 13, yeah. Is this diagram, which I know looks like the budget for a Fortune 500 corporation. It's not. Actually, do you want to grab? I meant to grab the 12 links. The Wheel of Life. You want to bring that in? Maybe we can set it up on that for the moment, and then I'll just point to it. Yeah. So what this is a schematic diagram of this part of this picture that always, by tradition, is hung right outside of the main shrine room of a monastery. It's got this big sort of monster called Yama with a wheel in his mouth, He's going like this, and then there's this wheel in his mouth. There's 12 pictures around the edge of the wheel that show the 12 links that are here. And that's what we're going to be talking about. There's other, you can see there's a sort of another inner circle. So see the 12 kind of outlined in red on the outside. These are pictures depicting this 12 links. This is according to the way the legend goes, this is the only picture designed by Lord Buddha, right? He told these royal artists exactly how to draw it. There's kind of a cool story. And then inside that outer level is the 6 realms of existence. In the very middle is a depiction of the 3 poisons: ignorance, attachment, and aversion. It's usually either a rooster or a pigeon. I'm not sure what it is. It's a bird. And a snake and a pig. That is the 3 poisons, and so you can see the 6 realms, and then the 12 links. So we're gonna use this diagram because I always just think it's simpler to get the concepts. We can all read, I would presume. In pre-literate culture, they have these symbols that would symbolize the thing. So we'll put that to the side, and then during the break, if you want to take a look at that, but we'll use the diagram. And the story is kind of interesting. So in the time of Lord Buddha, he had many students that were kings of these areas in India. And there's this one king, King Udayana, and he was related to the neighboring kings. So they were always giving each other gifts, right? So King Udayana would give the other king 3 white elephants piled with jewels. And then the other king would send back 6 white elephants piled with even more jewels and a troop of dancing girls. And then King Udayana has to up the ante, and it keeps going on like this for a while. And finally King Udayana goes to Lord Buddha and says, the royal treasury is empty. Like, what do I give him now? And Lord Buddha said, well, the gift of the holy Dharma, surpasses every other gift. He goes, give him this gift, and I'll design it, get the royal painters, and I'll design this thing that basically depicts the whole story of Buddhism in one picture. That'll be awesome. He'll love it, So the royal painters come. And so Lord Buddha, you can see, is up in the upper right-hand corner. So apparently he was posing for the royal painters, but he was so beautiful and radiant and magnificent that the royal painters are kind of, they're trying to paint him, and then they just keep going. Like that. So they said they had to put a sheet. Oh, thank you. Brilliant. Brilliant. Awesome. So the royal painters, they had to actually put a sheet. Who's Walter? It's like I didn't think his name was wrong. Great. So then, after the painting was finished, they sent this royal procession with the painting rolled up and, flowers, petals strewn in the street and all of this business. So this was the painting. And so the kind of monster guy that's got it in his mouth is Yama, the Lord of Death, right? So this is depicting the 12 links of cyclic existence or samsara, right? So it's interesting. Samsara is within the grip of the Lord of Death, but Lord Buddha's outside, right? So he's free of the cycle. He's free of the Lord of Death. He's free of the whole thing because he's up in the corner up there, right? So apparently this 12 links of dependent origination is what it's usually called, is the insight that Lord Buddha got that night under the Bodhi tree. When he was sitting under the Bodhi tree all night long, he saw how our samsara is created. He saw the forward, they say the 12 links in the forward direction, in the reverse direction. He saw how we can end it all. And this is a very unique presentation to Buddhism. This is the insight of Lord Buddha about how we create our unenlightened existence, lifetime after lifetime, and keep going through the wheel. So it's really important to understand this, because then we can see how we break through, right? How we get free. By understanding the 12 links, the point is to get free. So let's look at these. And so I've got a couple of concentric circles that don't relate to the other circles here. We're not getting into the 3 poisons and the 6 realms here. So look first to the very middle of your diagram. We're going to talk about these 12 links in terms of 3 lifetimes, right? So we've got the past lifetime, the present lifetime, and then the future lifetime here. So keep that in mind. Some of these links happened, for this, we're going to focus on the present life. Of course, all 12 links happen in every lifetime, but we're going to, we're sort of looking in detail at what is happening in the present life and what gave rise to it in the past life and what does it do to create the future life. So pay attention to these kind of here, it's these green marks. Okay, so let's look at all 12 and then we'll start breaking it down. How do we cut through? Can you see the diagram, or do you want to squish? You're not behind the pillar? You're all right? Okay. All right. So, first link, 1 o'clock, ignorance. G. Sound familiar? Ignorance at this beginning, just like in the diagram we had yesterday. So what kind of ignorance do you think this is?
The ignorance of the nature of reality.
Yeah. And the ignorance of cause and effect. So same exact thing. Remember yesterday I said, ignorance shows up at the top. The key. Same ignorance. Especially ignorance about the way things exist, that we're going to talk about a lot more today. So, ignorance leading to karmic formation. Okay, formation of new karmic imprints. Now there's something else missing that was in the other diagram that's just assumed. What needs to happen between ignorance and karmic formation? What's that? Well, remember that mental affliction, that afflictive emotion. So in the other one we had ignorance, mental affliction, karmic action. So that's just assumed. This is shorthand, right? But it's showing the relationship between ignorance and new formation of karma. So this is happening in the past. And then the first link in the present lifetime is consciousness. So this means, according to Buddhism, that subtle mental continuum, right, that subtle consciousness from the past life loaded with those karmic imprints now becomes associated. Let's just talk about a human being because that's easier for us, with the fertilized egg, right? So this is the first moment of the present lifetime. That continuum of consciousness from past life now becomes associated with the present DNA, the fertilized egg of that being. Okay? So carrying all of this, the karmic formations, from past lives, not just the most recent one, right? Because it could be from before too, if we haven't experienced that karma. So that consciousness. Name and form, that is a code word for those of you that have studied a little bit for the 5 skandhas, the 5 heaps. Basically, the body and the mind. Okay, for those of you that have studied the 5 heaps, if you haven't, don't worry about it. The body and mind. Name is kind of code word for mind, form is the body, right? So body and mind. And then the senses. So the sense powers, the ability to have a sense experience starts to form. And in the fetus, there's all these picture books of like when, those are so cool, aren't they? Like when you're pregnant, not that I've been in this life, but for, and you look through and you're like, oh, at 2 weeks, this is what it looks like, in 6 weeks and whatever. And at a certain point, the ears, the nose, the tongue, so the 6 senses, eyes, visual sense, consciousness? Ears, hearing, smelling, taste, touch. What's the sixth one? Is that ESP, Uri Geller, bending spoons? Mental consciousness. Okay, the mind is considered a sense, and the object of that mental consciousness is a thought, right? So that's the object. So the object of my visual sense consciousness is Luann's greenish, bluish, teal sweater. Should have picked an easier color. Okay, that's the object of my visual consciousness. The object of a mental consciousness is a thought, right? A thought. So those are the six senses. And then next is contact with the object of that sense. So we say for any sense perception, for any sense consciousness, we need a meeting of the sense faculty, the object, and a stream of consciousness. So I have a continuum of consciousness, right? From moment to moment. I have an eyeball that still functions, worse and worse by the day, but still. And then there's the object of that visual sense consciousness, which is Luann's teal. I'm just going to make it easy. Teal sweater, right? So meeting of that with the sense power gives rise to a visual sense consciousness. So that's what this contact is here. Okay? So any questions so far? Yeah.
The sixth sense mind is common to every sense perception.
Yes. Yeah.
We can't have one without the other.
Well, it's interesting. In Buddhist philosophy and psychology, we say the first moment is a I sense consciousness that gives rise in the next moment to a thought or a mental image. So even though consciousness is there, it's still considered an I sense consciousness versus a mental consciousness. The mental consciousness comes in the next nanosecond, because then we have a mental image that we're relating to and not the raw data. So in the first moment, it's kind of subtle, but in the first moment we say the raw data is coming in, but it's still considered a visual sense consciousness. And then in the next moment, I'm relating not to the raw data of Luann's teal sweater. I'm relating to my mental image of Luann's teal sweater. Yes.
In science they talk about potential and kinetic energy. You throw the ball up, it's potential, it comes down, it's kinetic.
Right.
So there is pure consciousness in every part of the term. There is consciousness without an object, but that becomes activated in the process of perceiving through the senses.
In Buddhism we say consciousness always has an object.
So that's the definition of consciousness in this context.
Yeah.
But there is that which is. There is consciousness.
We can differentiate it, but in actual fact, there's always an object. Yeah, according to Buddhist philosophy, we say we can isolate it conceptually, but in actual fact, you are always having one of the six consciousnesses.
If I may, I apologize. Then the experience of consciousness without an object, what is that called in Buddhism?
We say that you always have an object. You always have an object.
Talking about like space?
Like in meditation or
It's yeah. No, there's always an object of that consciousness. There's always an object of enlightened mind. Even when we're actually having a direct perception of emptiness, emptiness is the object we're directly perceiving. Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about that more later. I think it'll become more clear. We say there's always an object. So there's always the meeting of some object, even if it's a subtle mental object. It could be a very, very subtle mental object is the object of consciousness, but there's always something, even the direct perception, which we'll talk about in a minute, of a mere absence of a certain way of existing Emptiness is the object of that consciousness. But we'll talk about that a little bit more later. All right, so contact, and then the next is feeling. And now in Buddhism, this word feeling is not a synonym of emotion. You know, usually in English we use the word feeling as synonymous with emotion. Oh, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling happy, I'm feeling. This one has 3 basic flavors: pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. Okay, so feeling, for those of you that have studied the 5 aggregates, this is the feeling aggregate or the feeling skanda, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. So as a result of every contact with any object, this is what's called in Buddhist philosophy an omnipresent mental factor, meaning we always have some feeling. A lot of times neutral. Neutral is kind of our baseline kind of subtext to our experience, and then blips of pleasant and unpleasant. For example, this lovely chair that I've been sitting in for 2 days is pretty much a neutral. You know, I have contact with the chair, pretty neutral. It's not in the least bit uncomfortable, but it may not be the chair that I'd like to read the 7th Harry Potter novel in, you know, after about 8 or 9 hours, right? But it's, you know, to sit in it for an hour and a half at a time, pretty neutral. And so we say that our neutral karma is caused by just our ignorance that causes us to be reborn in samsara. That's the cause. So we talked about positive and negative karma. Neutral karma just gives us neutral feeling, right? And then we have blips of positive and negative. So feeling as a result of that contact, and then craving is the next step. If it's pleasant, craving for more contact. If it's unpleasant, craving to be separated. So even though it's craving, which seems to kind of connote, oh, I want more, but it can also be craving to be separated from that which is unpleasant. It's very interesting. In the Theravadan tradition, the Southern Buddhist school, we say in our tradition that ignorance is the root of samsara. In that school, they mostly say attachment is the root of samsara. Because for most of us, we've got about 1,000, give me more of the good stuff, thoughts to every one of the get me away from the crappy stuff, right? So our usual MO, we're going through life of like, what feels good, what's going to feel good next? And then every once in a while we're like, ugh, get that away. I mean, not, you know, everyone. So it's mostly true that attachment really is mostly, you know, the troublemaker. So that's why this one, craving. So this is just, ooh, that felt good. I wouldn't mind more. This next one, grasping, is I'm going to do something about it. So in this one, it's stronger. You've decided to have more of, you know, do action. You haven't taken the action yet, right? That's very important. You haven't taken action yet, but it's stronger. The craving is just, that felt good. Wouldn't it be nice to have more of that? This one is, I'm going to do something about it, okay? And then in the next one, which is called becoming, you are now taking action. New karmic seed planted, okay, with becoming. New karma. So then, future life, birth, aging, and death. This karma forces you, your consciousness. This is the propelling force for the next life. We say rebirth is conditioned by karma and mental afflictions and ignorance and so forth. And that karma created forces the next rebirth and everything else up to aging and death. And this is encapsulated in future lives. But this shows the dynamic of how our rebirth in samsara is created. Okay? So questions about any of the rest of the links? Yes?
go into that inner circle, either the afflicting emotions and karma,
Yeah.
cause, effect, and what's that blank space there?
Well, let's look at that. We're going to take a break,
Okay.
and then we're going to
Look at some of the relationships. Yeah, yeah. So any other questions about any of the 12?
It is linear. It's for starting point and it's sequential all the way around.
But it's not like there's just one of these per lifetime. We are in different links of all 12 in every moment.
In every moment, I might have just gotten the thing that I was craving, and meanwhile, I'm having a new sense contact with the new thing, right? So in every moment, there's overlapping. So it's not like this is just one per lifetime. It's like constant. You know, we're creating some new, karma in every moment.
Each event has those characteristics
Yeah,
lying behind it.
yeah,
Or in it.
that's right. Yeah, yeah. Yes?
Okay, if we go back up to the consciousness,
Yes,
and right before it where you have the karmic form,
yes,
okay, and that is what comes in with the consciousness into
Yes.
the present, ignorance comes as well.
yeah. Ignorance we always have.
This is just saying you wouldn't have a karmic formation without ignorance. But yeah, ignorance is, with all of them. This is just kind of saying the ignorance causes the new negative karma, which is loaded in your mind stream, which then comes into that rebirth, is associated with the other parts of the person, then becomes associated as this sixth consciousness is developed. But yeah, the ignorance is always there. Let's take a break, and then we'll come back and we'll look at how do we break through. Okay, we'll analyze how do we cut through this in our practice and using our understanding. So how about 11:30? So 15-ish, 17 minutes? Yeah. Okay. So any other questions about the 12 links? Yes?
So number 12, that the Buddha, you shared a beautiful story that the Buddha was sitting under the Bodhi tree and he saw how the samsara were created from lifetime to lifetime. So was that his perception of naming 12?
Yeah, this was his insight. This exact thing was his insight, apparently. I mean, one of many under the Bodhi tree that night, but this is where this teaching comes from. He got the insight of exactly how our samsara is created lifetime to lifetime. Because really, remember, that's the whole point of Buddhism, is to get free of uncontrolled rebirth, right? Like when we talk about the 4 links, or the 4 noble truths, and we say, okay, the real suffering that we're trying to cease is the suffering of just being subject to uncontrolled rebirth, and the forces for ordinary beings, propelling them from life to life, are these forces of the karma and delusion, right? So the point is liberation from that cycle of uncontrolled rebirth. Because no matter how much our rebirth is characterized by extreme pleasure, it's finite. It will end, right? And so that's why when we talk about, and I know a lot of you have studied the Lam Rim, the 3 scopes of the Lam Rim, we say the lowest level of aspiration is wishing to get free of lower realm rebirth, but that's very limited, because even any rebirth in samsara, no matter how blissful it is temporarily, you're still subject to, it will end. The karma for that lifetime will run out. And then the next karma will start to ripen. In fact, the bad news about the upper realm rebirths is mostly you've just used up all of your really good karma, and the next place is going to be down. You know, as Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, the lower realms are our permanent address, you know, and there's all of these metaphors for, you know, Lord Buddha picking up a fingernail of dust and saying, the dust under my fingernail is the amount of beings born in the upper realms. The dust in the rest of the planet is the number of beings born in the lower realms. So the whole point is to get free of the whole cycle. So that's why the Buddha, this is so fundamental to what the Buddha taught. Really, really important in terms of understanding the 4 noble truths, really. You know, the 12 links of dependent. For me, I mean, I have to say, I studied in the Tibetan system for a long time, you know, based on this picture. I never really got it for a long time. And it's like everybody said, oh, the 12 links, that was the big epiphany under the Bodhi tree. I was like, really? Like, I don't get how it helps to understand it all. And then actually in long retreat, I was really working with this, and I got some insights into how this works and how our practice can help us break through. And that's what we're going to talk about now. So where in this 12, yes, Jane?
Is the bardo represented?
No, it's not. It's not, right? So that's happening kind of here, right? Before, in between the lifetimes. So that's not represented explicitly. So in terms of these 12, where are some of the breakthrough points, as it were? How do we create the cessation of suffering? What are some of the ways? Where are some of the places in here? There are a couple of places. There's one I really want to emphasize, but there are a few. Yeah, Marianne.
I would say it's that rusting, like I want to do something. You start with craving. If you can, maybe you can't control the craving yet, but that I will do it, and you do it. Those two.
Okay.
These two places.
That's possible. It's hard. Once you're already at craving, it's pretty hard to cut through there. I won't say it's completely impossible, but once you've already gone, ooh, yeah, that feels good. Wow, that would be awesome. Yeah, hard not to go to the next step. So that's not one of the real practice points for us, but Doug has
So
some
if
idea.
feeling, if I feel like something is going to give me pleasure, I have to really stop and say, is it really going to give me pleasure?
And how do we do that? How do we do that? What ammunition do we use? Because that's one of the points I really want to emphasize is between feeling and even starting. But we can't just say, oh, I'm going to be stoic and deny myself and be renounced. How do we do it?
That whatever physical experience I really experience is still very permanent.
Yeah.
And so meditation on impermanence it would help.
That helps. So it's fleeting. And also, what about this question? Where does the pleasant feeling come from?
The mind.
Really? Yesterday, remember we said the definition of positive karma is that which causes an experience of pleasure, right? So remember we were talking yesterday, the difference between the how and the why. We think there's a cause and effect relationship here. We think this is the cause and this is the result. Is that true? What's the cause of the feeling? Way back here. Your karmic formation. Karma, right? Is the cause. And check this out. Cause and effect. All of this is the effect of karma, right? Even the contact. So let's use the chocolate cake as a metaphor. Right? We think that the chocolate cake caused the pleasant feeling. The chocolate cake is the condition, and what makes us feel happy is past karma. Really interesting. Past karma also caused the chocolate cake to be in our universe in the first place. You know? What's the proof that there's not a cause and effect relationship here?
Unpleasant. For some it kills them. For some it just tastes gross.
For if you just had your marriage breakup, the chocolate cake doesn't even taste like sawdust. Or if there was a cause and effect relationship here, the 11th piece of chocolate cake would be 11 times as delicious as the first one is. So there's all kinds of reasons, right? There's no cause and effect relationship here. That's a condition also created by karma. And the real cause is way back here. Cause, karma, right? So this is really huge because when we feel a pleasant sense experience, due to ignorance and thinking there's a cause and effect relationship here, we immediately go to craving, grasping, and the whole rest of it. Because you think that's the cause, you crave and grasp for more sense contact, especially if you do something stupid to get it, right? One of the 10 non-virtues to get more of it, you're just going to create an entire new rebirth. Whereas, if with your wisdom, and we don't even need a direct realization of the ultimate nature of reality, all we need to know is understand the 12 links. If you can remind yourself in that moment, it's my virtue creating this pleasant experience. I wouldn't feel a moment of happiness if I hadn't done some virtuous action, maybe in a past life. The chocolate cake is how, the virtue is why, right? That will cut through right here, right? So this is a real point right now in our practice. Like I say, without a high level of realization, but just an understanding of this, I would say create a gap here. And we have to create a gap with mindfulness and with understanding. One student in California said, gap? For me, there's no gap. It's just like, whoosh, you know, like that. But when we feel especially a strong feeling of pleasant or unpleasant that is motivating us for the next step, if we can stop and say, hey, it's not the thing, especially like I say, if we do something stupid and non-virtuous to have more sense contact or somehow avoid So this is really big for us in our practice right now, applying our understanding of karma. Like I said, the chocolate cake is a condition. It's not the cause. And the proof is it does not always work, right, to give us that experience. If it did, there would be a cause and effect relationship here, and there's not. Isn't that cool? Isn't that cool? So understanding that, we can choose. This is where we were talking yesterday a little bit, or it came up, I think, during one of the breaks. There's this whole idea, and a lot of people ask the question, what about free will in Buddhism? You know, if so much of our experience is determined by our karma, are we just like a robot of our karma, no way of choosing? And the Lamas always say, we can't help. Remember I said yesterday, if our karma is ripening to give us an experience that feels unpleasant, there's really nothing you can do about that, because that is a result of what happened way up here. But what you really can do is change, are you going to create a new cause or not? So with your wisdom right here, you've finished experiencing the effects of that one. Don't create the cause for another one, right? So right here, between this effect and this new cause is our choice point, right? So our choices are not determined by karma. We have tendencies, we have habituation, we have all of that stuff, but we do not, it doesn't force us to make the choice because the effects are finished with this thing. Yeah.
Well, it's like that, you know, that problem that Westerners have with the concept of karma, thinking that the result is the karma.
Yeah.
I can't stop, you know, past karma for my thing. You know,
Right.
I purify or I can't, but it's.
Yeah, but it doesn't determine your next action.
Anything,
It doesn't
I
determine your next
I
action.
can take actions
Yeah.
to create, you know, more virtuous karma in the future.
Yeah, right.
That's where the free will comes in.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's the choice point is here before. Now, one of my teachers, Tenzin Chogkyi Rinpoche, he's right, a couple of pictures right here. We were talking to him about this once, and he said, if the mental affliction is really, really powerful, it's almost as if you don't have a choice. So he said, you got a choice, but sometimes the mental affliction is so strong, it's almost as if you don't. And I think we've all been in situations like that. I know I have, when you're like, I shouldn't do it, I shouldn't do it, I shouldn't do it. Oh, I'm going to do it. Right? It's just too powerful. It almost forces it. But for most times, right, we really can. You know, our wisdom. And this is where the wisdom part comes in, and just really understanding this relationship. Because, like I say, I think this is a really huge point for our practice right now. And again, in those situations where you feel like you often mess up, take it to your meditation cushion and habituate yourself. Practice a different way of reacting until you habituate to that. You know, when there's those situations in your life that you know you just will do, you know, you lose it, like Thanksgiving dinner with your older sister or whatever it is, just habituate yourself to a different way of reacting. Yeah, Karen.
I remember things by writing them down.
Yeah.
I missed the second thing that you said. At this point where we have where we can make a difference, you said we can apply mindfulness, and the second point was something I missed altogether. It had to do with knowing that virtue created that.
Well, the wisdom, right? So we don't have the wisdom yet of the direct realization of the ultimate nature of reality, but one level of wisdom is understanding cause and effect and understanding the 12 links. So we slow down, we're mindful of those impulses that are coming up that will lead us to this, right? We're aware of those impulses, but then it's not enough to just be mindful and go, oh, there's an impulse. We have to remind ourselves, oh, I understand the cause and effect thing. That feeling was not caused by that object, it was caused by my karma. So reminding ourselves of that, that's a certain kind of wisdom that we can apply right now, right? Even without high levels of realization. Yeah. So mindfulness And that's part of our practice, is much more awareness of impulses that are arising, right? And plain old mindfulness practice helps a lot at this choice point, because if we're moving so fast and so impulsively, we're already at becoming. You know, there ain't no gap. You know, we're not moving slow enough and we're not aware enough. And that's one of the things I find, like, with practice is you notice, like, you know, like I was saying yesterday, before you notice after the fact, you've said that hurtful thing and you go, oh, shouldn't have done that. Then you back up a little bit, so you're saying it, and even as the words are coming out of your mouth, you're regretting it. And then you back up even more, so that you're forming the words, but you zip it, you know? And then you start to notice, I mean, I almost feel like physically, you know, then you feel it kind of in your gut, and you're just like, but it's not even fully formed. So it's that, you know, feeling more, you know, kind of backing up temporally to impulse, very even subtle impulse, and then applying the wisdom there. Because we do. At the beginning of practice, we're still completely out of control, right? And you're doing and saying all kinds of things, and then you regret, and then that night you do your purification practice, you know, and then we still do that for a long time. But I notice, you know, you catch it quicker and quicker, right? You know, as your awareness and your mindfulness becomes subtler and subtler, and so that really helps at this point right here. But then again, not just saying, oh, I shouldn't do it because Lord Buddha said so, because that doesn't really help. You just feel like, oh, you know, I shouldn't crave and grasp because Buddhism says I shouldn't crave and grasp. Then you just feel frustrated and you feel like Lord Buddha's trying to spoil all your fun. You know, so you got to understand at a deeper level, hey, I do not want to create the cause for another unenlightened existence. That's why I'm doing it. You know, really, you're not going to do it just because you heard attachment is bad. I mean, it just doesn't work for us. We just end up feeling confused and frustrated. Yes?
He experienced all of these things before he made the transition out of it. So he knew what they all felt like.
Yeah.
Which is sort of a precondition in order to be relieved of them in the first place.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if the first line coming between karmic formations and consciousness can also be a point of gap.
How does that work?
Because then you recognize the origins of the past karma beginning to stir.
Okay, but remember, at that point, we're talking about the past life forming karmic imprints, and then that consciousness is that mind stream taking rebirth, right? So already those karmas have formed in your mind stream, right? Now, one point that relates to that, right? So it's not like the forces of that karma will force another rebirth, right? So you can't really say at that point a consciousness loaded with karmic imprints will not go to the next life. So you can't really cut through in that way. However, what you're saying, I mean, one of the things that does help in terms of understanding our karmic formations is what we did yesterday with the karmic quiz. You know, I understand that I've got all of these karmas that are giving me my experience. I'm going to be extra mindful of that behavior and change my habits, right? Yeah, Matt, Walter?
Yeah. I get called much worse things. So I would think then, though, at aging and that again, the line between aging and death would be a point where you could start to make changes if you could work around that.
So after the death of that lifetime,
work on the death process and get to a place where you will be at peace when you're dying and have good throwing karma to move you in another direction.
Well, yeah, but you're still taking another rebirth, right? So even if you have a peaceful mind, it's still samsara. So we're talking about how do we get rid of samsara. Now, one other point, yeah, not just a better one, but how do we actually break through altogether?
That's get rid of the ignorance.
Yeah, so at the very first link, right? And we're going to talk about emptiness this afternoon. I do promise. I will not, we will get to that point. We say that we can actually eliminate completely our ignorance about the nature of reality. That's hard, right? We need for that a direct perception of emptiness over and over and over again. So that's really a huge point that we cut through, but for most of us, it's not going to happen anytime soon that we're going to be able to cut through at the first link. But that's really, we say that ignorance is the root of samsara. And the metaphor here, remember I said all these agricultural metaphors, you lop the branches off of a tree, they'll still grow back. If you really want to kill the tree, you just have to chop the roots. So that's why, for those of us that are environmentalists, not the greatest metaphor, but that ignorance is the root of samsara, meaning the whole thing comes from our ignorance. So the real answer is eliminating that ignorance, right? But again, subtle realizations that take a lot of meditation, a lot of work on developing our concentration. But the real key is at link number 1, right? Where we can work now is here. And then there's another point too, where we can work in our practice now. That can also be quite effective. We talked about it, a hint. For anybody who's here Friday night, it was one of the antidotes that we talked about Friday night, for anybody who might have been here. Anybody see?
On what you've done.
So before becoming?
Purification? No, after.
Purification too. Yeah, purification too. But cutting through before we've even created the new imprint. Remember we said, if you know that object is going to be triggering for you of a strong emotion, avoid the contact, right? So, in certain situations, temporarily, while we're working on our wisdom and our mindfulness and all of that, we can temporarily avoid the contact. Okay? This is a basis of a lot of monastic vows, for example, right? Avoiding contact with certain objects that will be triggering of strong craving and grasping and so forth. Okay, for example, we have a celibacy vow. And to protect our celibacy vow, we have a lot of vows about hanging out with the cute person, that we're attracted to protect. So avoiding the contact that it would even lead to, right? The feeling and then the craving and so forth. But, it's not just for monastics either. It's for all of us. If there's a certain contact with a certain object that is going to give rise to a strong emotion that's going to make you engage in some karmic action. But again, I think understanding this whole thing helps us. It's not like, the Buddha said avoid, and then we feel frustrated that we're avoiding contact, and we just kind of feel like we're trying to be good and we're by understanding this. In fact, before we get ordained, we go to this training where we get commentary and teaching about the vows that we're going to take. I always have this idea that actually I think we should really get a good explanation of the 12 links, because that really helps us understand why are we embarking on this kind of path of engaging in this morality. We understand how it prevents us from creating new causes for samsara. Okay? Isn't that cool? Did you know that from looking at that? Okay. Yeah, it's cool though, isn't it? To see the points where we cut through. So like I say, this for me is a really, really big one for our practice, and don't expect to be perfect right off the bat. But if we can remind ourselves, wait, what's the cause of that good feeling? the difference between the how and the why, right? That's really important. How it's happening, how it feels good is the chocolate cake is in my mouth. But why it tastes good is virtue. So you want a life filled with anything you put in your mouth is delicious. Help others, serve the Dharma, practice compassion. Anything you put in your mouth, your karma will force you to experience the experience of delicious. You know, you don't have to go out of your way. Chris and I were talking this morning in the kitchen about the happiness that comes from sensory pleasure versus the happiness that comes from meditation and other practices and things like that. So we say an enlightened being has so much virtue that every sense contact that enlightened being has, because of their virtue, they're forced to experience bliss, no matter what. That's why His Holiness looks the way he does all the time. You know, he could be eating, I mean, they put him up at the Four Seasons Hotel, you know, they invite him to this nice place. He has no craving and grasping at all, but he can enjoy it. But he would enjoy it the same if he was at McDonald's. Like, honestly, he would. Because of his virtue, he enjoys everything. I was talking to my friend Tim McNeil, who's the director of Wisdom Publications, the other day, and he met with His Holiness recently to present a book of His Holiness that Wisdom published. And he was showing me this beautiful picture, and he's kind of bowing down and holding out the book, and His Holiness is going, with this radiant, incredible, and we were saying, His Holiness' face looks like that, whether it's the bellboy at the Four Seasons, the president of India, the publisher of Wisdom, doesn't matter. Whoever he's with, and you just feel like you're the only person that exists in that moment in his sphere. So that's the cause of happiness is virtue. So just forget about grasping at things. I mean, that's the message. Yes, as we were saying yesterday, we need a certain amount of, you know, our basic needs met. And then beyond that, which isn't so hard, really, go after happiness the smart way. Serve others. Get over yourself. Practice compassion. Get a direct realization of emptiness, because those are all the real causes of happiness, right? And so whenever you feel this arising, and like I say, with your mindfulness practice, more and more subtle, you become aware of those impulses for God's sake, especially before you do something stupid. And we've been talking about retaliation a lot, this four pure practices. So this works not just for the craving for more, but the craving to be separated. So, the yelling boss is in your face, screaming. The face is red, the spittle is coming out. You are not feeling terrific at all, okay? You think that that yelling boss is the cause of your unpleasant feeling. You know, it's your past karma that's the cause of that experience. The best way to guarantee yourself future lives filled with yelling bosses, yell back. Guaranteed future lives filled with angry, yelling bosses. So, best way to cut it, don't retaliate. That's why non-retaliation is such a basic principle of Buddhism. It's just saying, be smart. Don't create the next cause. It's not about being nice. Not about being a nice person that's patient and calm. It's like, don't react because you don't want to create a new cause. That's all.
Express themselves by the nature of to call upon a very strong nuance between emotion and feeling of the karmic seed of hate when we are the witness of great hate.
Mm-hmm.
And so the nature of these forces that come from the same place, love or hate or compassion.
Well, that's why they all come from, we say all of the negative emotions come from ignorance that's misperceiving and exaggerating that object is for hate unpleasant, right? And is distorting our perception. So that's why ignorance is all the way back at the beginning for everything, because we have a distorted perception, and we'll get into that this afternoon, because we'll look at how does emptiness, how does an understanding of emptiness fit into this too, and how can we use that understanding. What we just looked at is how do we apply our understanding of karma, right, to these 12 links. So what we're going to do after lunch is talk about emptiness, and then how do we apply our understanding of the fact that there's this dichotomy between the way things exist and the way they appear. How do we apply that to that?
The example yesterday of Milarepa, who was a criminal, correct?
Yes.
If I call back a memory from yesterday, which doesn't exist anymore. So, this Milarepa was a criminal, correct?
He murdered 32, Helena? 32 members of his family. Yeah.
Yet, in that very same life, he was able to turn that around.
That's right.
So the same force
Yeah.
to really match that choice.
Yeah.
He became enlightened, this Milarepa,
Yeah.
in one lifetime.
Yeah.
But he had to.
With a lot of work.
But he had to do a lot of work in his previous lives.
Yeah,
for
right.
that to happen in
right.
that
Yeah.
lifetime.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Don't be sorry.
So,
Don't be sorry.
well, I just had a really big, confusion that came
Okay.
up from looking at that.
Okay.
So, I understand a feeling, right? You have
Yeah.
a feeling and it's a pleasurable feeling. You know,
Yeah.
you like it. Like Venerable Bina says, we're all addicts.
Yeah.
You know, so, we have craving, grasping. We understand that those things they don't bring real happiness lasting. But I'm scared that Buddhism, I think, is a better way of attaining sustained happiness. But how do you approach it without getting attached to the idea that, okay, this path makes sense, but how do you approach it in a healthy way, a way that doesn't have you wanting the next fix of Buddhism, you know?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, there's definitely ways we can be attached to certain aspects even of our spiritual path. I mean, there are people that do that about, like Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Oh, I'm only happy when I'm sitting at the feet of Lama Zopa. However, remember, attachment isn't just wanting something, right? It involves a distorted perception. Seeing that object as pleasant, exaggerating the pleasant qualities in a distorted, ignorant way, thinking that by having it. Now, if we fully commit to our spiritual practice, these great beings, like Milarepa we just said, man, he worked hard. He wanted it bad. He had desire to purify and attain enlightenment. So just wanting something isn't wrong if the wisdom is there, right? And it's not a distorted exaggeration of that thing outside is going to make me happy. But as you say, we can have that about Buddhism. Oh, I'm miserable unless I'm sitting in the Gompa at Kurukulla Center experiencing a teaching. I mean, come on, right? That's distorted. That's distorted because you got to go out of here and do the hard work yourself. I heard a story once about Lama Yeshe. And there was this one student that was so attached to him and so grasping, he forbade her from seeing him for 5 years because he realized that she was attached to him in a very unhealthy way, and he completely cut her off for many years, right? So that it can happen that even the object is virtuous, but our attitude towards that object is distorted. But we shouldn't mistakenly think that just wanting something badly is attachment and is something. Bodhisattvas can't wait for all beings to be free of suffering. They work 24/7, 365. for that goal. You know, look at Lama Zopa Rinpoche. He literally does not sleep, or at least before he had manifested the stroke. He literally did not sleep. He was serving beings 24 hours a day. Intense, incredible devotion, not one shred of attachment, right? It was out of this wisdom and this capacity and this ability. So don't be afraid of intensity. Don't be afraid of, you know, wishing and desiring something out of wisdom. That's an important distinction, I think, right? But yes, we can be attached even to aspects of our spiritual path in a way that's distorted. Our teachers will usually let us know, like Lama Yeshe, pretty quickly, like off, quit, you know, whatever, right? So we can. I mean, you're absolutely right, but don't be suspicious about intensely desiring something out of wisdom and putting a lot of intense effort into that, because that's what's needed. We've been mentioning Milarepa. He worked hard. Yes, he did this thing, and there were these past life imprints, but once he got on the spiritual path, man, he went through it. And I think that's why his biography is so popular, because we can really relate to the hardship that he went through. Sometimes you read other spiritual biographies and they're like, they met their guru, and then 12 years later they went off to the paradise of bliss, and you're like, what happened during the 12 years? That's what I want to hear about, because that's where I am. You know, and I think that's why that biography is so popular, because it talks about the struggles that we go through in the spiritual path. But yeah, don't be suspicious about strong, wise desire. Okay? Helena.
I want to come back for a moment to the contact where you actually talked about, in order to avoid the feeling that creates the craving, is that one of the tricks would be to avoid the contact so it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But if it's the contact that is the trigger that allows you to deal with something that is habitual, then I don't see avoiding it as being the wise thing to do.
Yeah. I'm just saying, if contact with that object is always going to do something that's going to create a new non-virtuous karmic seed, right? So definitely, you know, we need to practice with the difficult situations. I'm just saying there are some that are so triggering that we're going to really blow it every time we're in that situation. For the meantime, as we're working on our ability to not react and not do the knee-jerk response. So that's, but it's not about, I mean, if it were even possible, you know, we're not talking about just insulating yourself from anything that could ever possibly be triggering, like that's ever going to happen. I'm just saying, for some of us, for certain situations, we know we're not in control. Okay, just for the meantime, until we get stronger.
It is the karma that is producing that.
Yeah.
Then it needs to be addressed.
Yeah,
Yeah, I can see
that's
that.
right,
You can
that's
do
right.
it as you can.
So what that strategy is saying is that's the contact is the condition for that karma to ripen. So what you're doing is you're keeping the seed in the seed packet in the dark rather than putting it in the pot with the water and the sunlight. That's all. That's all you're doing by avoiding contact. The seed is still there, right? What you're doing is avoiding the conditions that will cause that seed to ripen into that experience, which will then cause you to say or do something, right, and get the whole ball rolling. You're keeping it into the seed packet until you can scorch that seed enough that it's never going to sprout even when you put it in the soil, to carry the metaphor beyond the extent that it's ever been carried before, right? So this is the soil, the sunlight, the water, right? No amount of soil, sunlight, and water is going to cause a broccoli plant with no seed. But the broccoli seed ain't going to sprout without the soil, the sunlight, and the water either. So it's working with the causes and the conditions, right? With our understanding, working on both to keep ourselves from a situation where we're going to create new negative karma. That's the point. Yeah, Lisa.
I don't know if this makes any sense, but I think I'm having a difficult time. Well, I'll just talk about one thing, or two things, but one thing I'm having a difficult time with is trying to differentiate the difference between contact and energy. And it's like that sense that I get when I'm speaking to someone and they want me to do something, maybe sign a contract or something, and something tells me no.
Yeah.
I'm walking my dog who never barks at anyone.
Right.
And then he sees a man and all of a sudden he starts barking.
Yeah.
And it's telling him no, danger.
Right. Like, what's that?
Yeah,
Kind of thing, yeah.
So I'm thinking, is this like energy? Because there's times when I'm very familiar with it.
Yeah.
And I can just kind of block it off and kind of create an emptiness.
Right.
And that's where that instantaneous, like meditative process, it just fills in that void right there.
Yeah.
But I'm just having a hard time understanding actually contact and understanding ignorance and what actually, because you had said that ignorance, all negative emotions come from ignorance. And I'm thinking, well, if all negative emotions come from ignorance, what else comes from ignorance? So.
Yeah, and then it leads to those negative actions. But the thing you're talking about, that's kind of an interesting thing, that sort of, you'll have an instinct about something, or you'll be going into a situation, you have this strong feeling to maybe not go there or don't get in your car, something like that. I always feel like that is, we talk about Buddha nature, and that we have this kind of potential wisdom that may not be completely manifest. I found in my experience, more and more on the spiritual path, that inner voice kind of thing, I look at it, we talk about the inner guru, which is your own wisdom guiding you. Often I really think those moments are my inner wisdom guiding me. And it may not make sense, it may not be something that I can figure out logically, but I found when I don't pay attention to that, it's always a mistake. And every time I don't pay attention to it and it's a mistake, I say, I'm never going to ignore it again. I usually do. But more and more, I trust, and I find those voices become kind of louder and louder and clearer as we progress, because your own Buddha nature is flourishing. Your own inner wisdom is guiding you more and more. So I find that kind of doesn't show up anywhere in here, except to say, that's part of the wisdom that's the antidote to that ignorance, right? It doesn't show up explicitly in the 12 links, but I really think that that's our inner wisdom. Like I say, it's not a question of, you get enlightened, suddenly overnight you go from 0 to 60. It happens gradually, one kind of increment at a time. And like I say, I think that wisdom voice guiding us just becomes louder and louder and louder, step by step by step on the path. And I think that's what that is. And we can't always figure it out. But in terms of the 12 links, I guess that would relate to that first link of ignorance, because that would be a wisdom that would then guide us into not being in a situation where we're going to maybe create more new negative karma. Yeah, that's just my kind of feeling about what you asked. Yeah. What I want to talk about is the big topic of emptiness. We're going to talk about what emptiness is, look at that a little bit, and then we're going to cycle back and apply our understanding of emptiness to this diagram. But before we do that, we need a little nutrition, I think, right? So let's take a break now, and let's see, 12. Can we come back at 1:30? Is an hour and 15 minutes enough? Yeah. Because if we do that, we might be able to finish a little early this afternoon, because there's a storm coming in. So let's move it up a little bit.
And some sport then, too.
You know, I didn't get the somebody explained to me your deflated football. I'm so out of it. I had no idea what you were talking about. And then this morning I had the oral transmission of what the deflate gate. I mean, I'm a nun, and now I live in Canada where it's all about hockey. So I didn't have any idea what you were talking about. When does that whole football thing happen today?
6:30 or something.
Does anybody really care? No, I don't ask the question. Lisa cares. Lisa's like, okay, we'll get you home in time, Lisa. No worries. So let's do that. Let's get back at one. Yes.
Before you break,
Yes.
could you just point
To where, like this
Which is which?
starts on
So,
there.
you know, some of these paintings are not correct. This one is. So here's ignorance, and it's a blind person walking with a cane. So yeah, during the breaks, you can look, and I think it's correct. Sometimes you get the painting which isn't correct at all, but there's like shops in Kathmandu that you go into the back room where they have the tankas that are correct for the practitioners, and then they have the tourist ones in the front room. So sometimes when I'm teaching this class, somebody will whip out a tanka and I'll look at it and I'll be like, we won't look at that one. This is the tourist one. I think this is correct. So yeah, so you can match up, you know, and look at this during the break and see how
With
each
what's over
picture,
here relates
So
to-
these are the
okay.
12 links on the
Okay.
outside, and I think it's correct. Just looking at it, yeah, it looks correct to me. But again, when I first started learning it, it was kind of like I'm trying to learn the concept and the picture, and there's a monkey, and there's a house with empty windows. It was just too confusing. But yeah, take a look during the break, and then you see the 6 rounds, and then the snake and the pig and the rooster in the middle, and so it's kind of interesting to just look at the whole thing during the break. All right, enjoy. Yes.
In between contact and feeling. So you have an accumulation of all these events, and then you're at contact. You could cross to feeling, but you're saying you could introduce a gap. Is the method of the...
After feeling, not before feeling.
Okay.
No gap before feeling. Once you have the contact, because feeling is what we call an omnipresent mental factor. It will always result from contact.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is that gap method return to your breath, acknowledging this sense factor and letting it out? Is it just meditation, really, at that point?
You know, that really helps, I think, to just slow everything down, return to your breath. I think the more we meditate on this and do analytical meditation and really deeply understand it, often, even in the moment, that understanding will kick in, right? But we need to have the mindfulness to know, hey, okay, now I'm having this really strong feeling, but the more we're habituated to how it works by doing analytical meditation on this, so I think it's a combination of just plain old mindfulness practice and analytical meditation is the fuel for being able to create that gap.
Yeah. All right. Bon appetit. See you at, what did we decide? 1:30? I want to show up on time. That would be, I wouldn't be able to do much without me. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.